I have a slide presentation. I guess if you want to get that ready, I can start talking, but I am a TV weather person. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. And Dr. Sarfati actually wrote the foreword for my book, Taking the Heat, How Climate Change is Affecting Your Mind, Body, and Spirit, and What You Can Do About It, which I'm grateful for. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. I just want to tell you first, I wrote another book about extreme weather, which was a guide to surviving natural disasters. And that was published by Macmillan. This one is published by Simon & Schuster, and it just came out less than a month ago. So before I get started, I have a very short video that will tell you a little bit about me and the book. If we're ready to go to the next slide. Oops, there should be audio on there.
Can you hear the audio?
Not yet.
Okay, hang on one sec, sorry.
New book. That's it. I'm meteorologist and author Bonnie Schneider, and I want to tell you about my new book, Taking the Heat, How Climate Change is Affecting Your Mind, Body, and Spirit, and What You Can Do About It. For over the past 2 decades, I've been reporting on all types of extreme weather. From hurricanes to wildfires, severe storms to floods. Many of these events are happening more often and with greater frequency due to climate change. In researching and writing this book, the doctors and medical professionals I interviewed say that climate change is impacting their patients' health right now. In this book, I speak to young people about their fears for the future of this planet. Psychologists say these are very real concerns and offer coping tips in taking the heat. Plus learn ways to talk to young children about their fears of climate change. This book examines the science behind why connecting with our natural environment, practicing gratitude and mindful meditation can help enhance our overall mental well-being. Taking the Heat will help you navigate and proactively face these challenges in our changing environment. Okay, next slide. So that's a little bit about the book. And when I was first coming up with the concept to write a book after being on television for, I would say, at least 25 years, I was covering, in 2019 at MSNBC, some of these stories that you see on the screen here that were the bigger stories of that year, like Hurricane Dorian, the fact that we had the wettest consecutive 12 months with flooding, and the heat wave in Europe. And as a meteorologist who's worked in the national level and the local level, I noticed on my own and speaking with my colleagues that we were seeing a lot of these events happening with greater frequency. And the reason I wanted to write the book was to explain and dig deeper into the human impact. My first book was about the weather itself and how to prepare and survive. So if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to do was to talk about the urgency, and that's something that a lot of the panelists have already spoke about. And how do you relay the urgency? Well, if you're a television person, you're doing it through the TV. You have a lot of graphics behind you with breaking news banners and music, and it's very easy for somebody that's walking through a room to know, okay, we're getting breaking news, it's urgent right now. But as you all know, with climate change, it's a lot tougher to communicate, especially if people don't feel that it's an imperative threat that's happening right now. So the way I wanted to break this down was to use the resources of doctors like yourselves and the medical consortium. And that's how I actually found Mona. And I believe I reached out to her at least over 2 years ago. And speaking with her about the various ways that climate was affecting health. And the more that I spoke with her and other experts that I interviewed for this book, like Dr. Holder as well, the more I found that there was a lot more to talk about. So what I wanted to share with you is that as a TV meteorologist, that there's a great partnership that can be worked out wherever you are in the country, wherever you are in the community, to connect with your local media and your local weather people. And some of that people are doing that already through Climate Central and Climate Matters. And Climate Central has been a huge resource for my book as well. They put out terrific information for the media that's very media friendly for graphics and things like that. But I would just say that as someone who's worked in television as long as I have, that most weather people are very receptive to getting information, sharing expertise, particularly if it helps tell a story. We go to the next slide. You'll find that it's one of the stories that people relate to, and many of you are aware of this already, but as TV people or radio meteorologists, you're talking a lot about the pollen count of the day and the allergy season, but not everyone is aware of the connection between allergy season, where millions of Americans are suffering from allergies, and the connection to climate change. And that's an example of a story that can be enhanced through the relationship between a weather person and a doctor, and storytelling. And that's something that I talked about in my book. And if we go to the next slide, what's unique to this book that I feel is that I did 10 chapters in the book, where 5 of them focused on mental health. And I can't tell you how many people I spoke to that were vaguely aware of some of these matters, but not at all to the depths that they should be, really. Eco-anxiety was one that I covered extensively in the book, speaking to young people and speaking to experts like yourselves on how people can cope with it. Many people were unfamiliar with the term solastalgia completely. I did a video on that for Newsday in a series on weather and health. I find it fascinating, and I think that the people that I explained it to did as well. And finally, with post-traumatic stress, that's something that's very relatable, because if you're whatever part of the country that you're in facing a type of disaster, whether it's a California wildfire or a hurricane in Florida, snowstorms here in the Northeast where I'm based, if this is the type of thing that could affect your family, destroy your home, your property, it's something that people relate to, and the medical and health effects are really important to share. So that's what I set out to do with this book, and that's what I set out to do now going forward with my career as I continue with the work I do in television and writing. If we go to the next slide, what I am looking to do is gather more information on climate and health. I created a website called weatherandwellness.com, and anyone that's watching could certainly reach out to me there. I'm doing some new projects now where I'm using weather data, which is something I'm familiar with for all the years of working as a meteorologist, but combining that with environmental data and AI, and I'm doing some exciting things in those areas. So for me, this book sparked an interest in something that I'm going to continue to develop and work on and get the message out. And I encourage you all as medical professionals is to lean on the community in television and radio and media, because again, most people in my field are receptive and looking for valid experts and ways to help tell a story. And Dr. Cooper just put a message out, and she was also someone that I talked to very early on when writing about this book. So I want to thank you all, everyone that's watching that I did talk to, that I did reach out to. I value your expertise so much, and I really appreciate that I was able to put that all in one book, and so far so good. Fingers crossed people seem to like it. That's my presentation. Thank you. Oh,
We can take some questions for Bonnie. And let's see, I guess the way to do that is put your question in the chat, and then we'll pose them from the center here. We've got some comments already about what a wonderful book it is. So that's great to see.
And I will put up the links for anything that you guys, I see some comments, I'll put those in there. Okay, yeah. So
Dr. Oppenheim, yes, how can we get more TV weathercasters to publicly link what they're reporting to climate change? How can medical professionals make that happen in their communities? I think all of us have had that experience of just waiting for that next comment that doesn't come.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I've worked also as a reporter, so I kind of know the way both sides of it work. If you were, being interviewed as a reporter interviewing you. So you have really 2 ways to go here. If you're looking to, let's say you are an allergist and you would like to get the messaging about climate change and allergy season out there to your local TV station. As an example, one way would be to reach out to what's called the assignment desk at that news link and to email them. And I always tell this to anyone, keep your points in bullet points and very concise, and why you're the person to talk to, because most of these people that are deciding what gets on the news are very busy and they just want the facts. So they'll get into the details with you later, but just the basic bullet points and why you're the person that, maybe a little short bio of why you're the person to talk to. I can tell you from all these, I've worked in stations in Boston, Miami, CNN, everybody, doesn't matter how big or small they are. I worked in a small market in Louisiana. Everyone's looking for ideas. So it's not going to be completely dismissed in any way. If you have something to say, reach out to the assignment editor. The meteorologist is different and may even be more accessible now through social media, through Facebook and Twitter and other social channels. Many meteorologists put out their work email on their Twitter bio, for example, or on their Facebook page, and sending them a message. I would say most, if not even, I was going to say 90% of the time, but I would say very much of the time it's going to be well received. If it's something valid to what's happening in the weather right now, if it has to be in relation to your community, especially for local news. So you want to target, like, for example, with Dr. Holder in Miami, we focused on Miami and heat. And the interesting aspect of that is where people would say, well, isn't it always hot in Miami? Well, you might not realize, but it's actually affects people in different ways, and it's gotten warmer, and who's more vulnerable than others. So there's lots of angles you can take as long as it's newsworthy.
And so there are more questions about that, about contacting your local meteorologist. Can you again say, is there a specific editor to contact? How do you, for your local station, find the people that you're most likely to be able to reach?
Yeah, I would say that, it depends on the size of the city. Like, I'm in New York City, so it's a very large market. It might be harder to get somebody, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. The best thing to do is two things. First, go to the station's website. I often find that the actual emails of the reporters and the weather people, the meteorologists, are actually on the website. So that could be one way you could just get directly to email them. And the other is their social media pages, and to post something to them via Facebook. I would say that would be, for the weather people, that might be the most direct way to reach them. However, if you're looking for a news reporter who's doing a story on allergy season, and pretty much a lot of these stories they do every season, that's something that you want to tap in on to be potentially the person to be interviewed. The assignment editor, so it's assignment editor at a newsroom. They work at something called the assignment desk. So even if you were to call a random TV station and someone answered the phone, you would ask to speak to the assignment desk. And that's whoever answers the phone there, they're the ones that are giving the actual assignments to reporters. And the other thing I just want to say is if you really want to do this and you want to get interviewed, be persistent, because often the reporters or the assignment desk will take the person that just kept calling the most. All right, interview this doctor. I wish it was more scientific than that, but that's often what happens.
And there's another question here that is relevant to this, from a doctor in California, said that they often get calls looking for physicians who can say something about the impact of wildfires, for instance, on their patients. And they would like to say something about climate change, but then, the only thing that is quoted is that kind of dramatic piece of information about a patient. And, how can they work to change that?
That's a really good question. I think that it has to be, so let's say you're being interviewed by a television station. You have to realize that they're only going to take 15 to 20 seconds of whatever it is you say in a sound bite. So I would just say, if you can, and you're wanting to word that in, is to try to get it in as most concisely as possible with the messaging that you want. For example, with the wildfires, and let's say you're talking about the rate of people coming into ERs with heart disease during the time during wildfires, there could be a way where you're wording that in relation to climate change. And it's for you to decide how to word it. But I would say the more you can, when you're being interviewed, put that as part of what you're saying. You can't control, you're right, what quote they use, but you can control how often you mention it and how you weave it into whatever it is you want to say.
Great,
and if anyone wants to reach out to me, I can give more assistance with that. I'm happy to.
Yeah, that would be great. There's a great deal of interest in this topic. And I see here that Ed Maybach actually said that he knows many meteorologists around the country, that they tend to be friendly. I guess we would love to think about some systematic way of finding the meteorologists in our communities and maybe encouraging our network of doctors to get in touch with them and introduce themselves, maybe with a little instruction about how to do that. What do you both think about that? I'll ask Ed as well. I see he's online there. So Bonnie, what do you think? And Ed, if you want to comment, please feel free.
Yeah, Ed was talking about Climate Central. Maybe Ed, you can talk more about how they work with weather people.
They and we have a partnership that called the Climate Matters program, and half of all the weathercasters across America now receive our each week they receive localized climate reporting materials to help them talk about climate change, not as a global issue, but as a local issue. And as I said in the chat room, like Bonnie, these are the most friendly people you will ever meet. They are just lovely. They're also almost all extroverts, not an introvert among them. And they're also, because they themselves are highly trained experts, they are really appreciative of our expertise. And so just reach out, establish a relationship. And they increasingly see themselves as their station's scientist. The station scientist is their role. And so to have a relationship with medical experts who are really up to speed on the health ramifications of climate change in their community, I'm really confident you'll be helping them add value, and ultimately they will be helping you add value as well.
There's also a greater demand now for content for each person working there, whether it's a reporter or a weather person, because you're not only required to deliver the weather on the newscast, but you're doing it on your social media channels. So in that regard as well, they're always looking for something. If you want to talk about, let's say it's going to be, a hot day, and we're giving the usual heat weather warnings that are typical, but another way to tell the story could be provided by the medical expert that will add more context and give them an opportunity. If they don't get it on the 6 o'clock, they can try for the 10, or they could put it on their social channel. It's always that additional content that every broadcaster is looking for.
Yeah, and thanks, Bonnie, for mentioning social media. I engage with a lot of my weathercaster friends through social media, and so it's a really easy way for all of you to start to develop relationships with the broadcast meteorologist in your community, because trust me, they are all on social media. That is a really important part of their job, and to be able to use that and provide your expertise to their viewers, their social media followers, again, great way to add value for them, great way for you to share what you know about climate and health.
Oh, that's a great insight. Here's a related question. I bet many of the people who are watching this right now have had the experience of watching coverage of a hurricane down in Florida, or a blackout in Texas, or a flood somewhere else, and not hearing about climate change and railing at the television screen about the lack of mention of something which seems so obvious. What about, kind of negative, critical feedback through Twitter, or Twitter, I guess, mainly as a social media? Is that a no-no? Would that be helpful? Should it be directed to the station if you want to give some negative feedback? Should it be directed to the individual?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. So this is just my take on it. It could be that they didn't do it. It doesn't always necessarily have to come because they chose to, they knew that there was that connection and they chose to not say it. It could very well be that there was a timing issue, or they weren't sure if that was definitely the right way to say it. So it could be that you reach out to them in a way, well, did you know that there's a connection between intensity of hurricanes, or the fact that they're longer lasting now, and that there is a connection to, I would say if you posed it that way, it would be much more received and more likely that they'll say it on the next time, because you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. So.
Yeah, thank you. Very helpful. So where can people get the book? They want to recommend it to patients or to friends, or get it for family?
Definitely. I really wrote it for anybody, even people that aren't interested in, that aren't following the climate story, that are just interested in, health and wellness. So I'm just putting up my website in the chat. And it's obviously, the book's on every bookseller, but my website is up there, and you can reach out to me and Thank you. I mean, I hope, I wrote the book for the average, just everyday person, like I said, about mental health and physical health. And the mental health seems to be, in the press that I've done for the book, that what people are really drawn towards coming out of this pandemic. They're very interested in how does our environment link up with stress and anxiety. So for those of you that cover that area, I can tell you that seems to be a topic of growing interest.
Yeah, the President's State of the Union focused on mental health, and there's no question that for everybody, 2 years of pandemic, and now a war, and a lot of the dissension on the political scene, I think just, really have come together to make it very difficult for people. Suicide rates are up. The story of the soccer player in Stanford, this 22-year-old woman who was a goalie for the Stanford women's soccer team. She apparently committed suicide, and we understand that suicide rates up, especially amongst teenage girls. There's a lot to think about, and there's a lot of stresses, and I think there are opportunities, tremendous opportunities right now to bring all of the issues that are causing stress to the fore and to help people figure out how to deal with them. And having read your book, I think you offer a lot of, really excellent medical advice, policy advice, personal advice. There really are approaches in there for people who want to take all kinds of different, measures to make themselves feel better and to take care of their friends and family. And of course, the consortium, really wants people to know that they can take action and advocate for climate solutions, and that can also really help with mental health. And I know you have a lot about that in your book as well. So it's people need to take different types of approaches. But if we can lay out the menu of what those are, hopefully people can find their way to getting what they need.
That sounds great.
Let's see, there may be another question or two. We have another 5 minutes. There's a lot of thank yous. People asked about the clip that the video that you played. I guess that's probably on the website. Is that right?
Yeah, it is on the website, and I uploaded it to YouTube as well. But it's right when you go on the website, I think it's the first thing you'll see.
Yeah, somebody's also asked about training of meteorologists and weathercasters. Is there the potential for you to be called on to be part of the education process?
I was just thinking about that with some of the questions, that could be something to approach, because there is through the American Meteorological Society continuing education and conferences and things like that. So I have to look into that. But I think that one of the comments here was the saying that the goal would be for the weathercasters to automatically make the connection. I think that I think for some of them, either they don't know, or that maybe they're not sure how to put it into their weathercast. But I do think that there is room for more education for weather people. Climate Matters and your group that you're working with has been terrific, and that's been one of the things I just want to also say about that group is that the way they do the graphics, they're perfect. You can just put them right on the air. They're designed to have the information that they gather from you folks, and then you could be watching it on TV, and it's done in a way where it's part of the weathercast. So it's things are getting better, and they will keep getting better, I think, as we talk about this more.
I can't resist asking you also what you thought about Don't Look Up. Have you seen the movie?
I have it on my recorded thing, and I haven't watched all of it, but yeah, I can relate to it. It's so funny because there's so many things that I want to watch, and that was like the first one I marked. But no, I mean, I'll have to get back to you on that with a full review.
Yeah, there's some very amusing satire of television broadcasters, although not necessarily meteorologists, just broadcasters in general.
But I think that there's so many topics that the TV weather people would be interested in discussing, maybe that go beyond some of the more obvious ones that they cover, but factors that you as medical professionals have dealt with patients that really that maybe aren't as well publicized. Those are the types of things that catch people's eye and they think, well, maybe I should mention this. And it takes a lot of persistence, of course, because TV people get, caught up and distracted, but they'll respond if you keep asking.
So it sounds like you're telling us, go ahead and tweet at our local newscasters.
Yeah, or email them.
Weathercasters, or
Mhm.
email them and give them some information and repeat it. And,
Yeah, and if they don't get back to you, then
Mhm.
just try again, and always do it from a way that maybe you don't know, like they could have tried to get the story on and maybe they ran out of time, but it's always good to start the relationship, because then you'll eventually get that something will come up. Like, for example, I've had that happen with media reaching out to me, talking about post-traumatic stress after natural disasters. And they were interested, and then I didn't hear from them. And then we had a disaster here in the New York City area. We had some massive flooding, and then I heard back from them again. So it's sometimes just having that relationship that it'll eventually come back to you, and you'll be able to get your messaging across, because everyone on here has important messaging, and the more that the word gets out, the better.
That's extremely helpful and reminds me of the advice that I often give about reaching congressional staff. I worked as a congressional staff person for a number of years, and so people often complain about it being extremely difficult to get the attention of a staff person. And actually with repetition is the key. Not giving up and sending repeated messages, sometimes saying in the subject line, second message, third message, let them know that you're really trying to get their attention. So
yeah, and I would also just say, as someone, and I would also just say, you also have to always assume when someone's the meteorologist, there's a million other voices kind of telling them how much time they have, or, oh, sorry, we need you to move on. So that's why sometimes it's harder to get exactly the message that you want, but that's also why it's important to be persistent with the weather person. The weather person does have a say. I mean, I don't know if you all realize this, but when people are delivering the weather, there's no teleprompter. It's just, you're just talking with a map. There's no script or anything. So that does give you some leeway to kind of bring in points that are relevant to the weathercast. So I think it's a great connection to get the messaging across.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and speak with you. And